Welcome to the Intelligence Hour, cutting-edge expose on the actions of government in light of the U.S. Constitution. I'm your host, former CIA officer Kevin Shipp, reporting to you from a secure studio somewhere deep in the southern United States. You can reach me on my Facebook page, From the Company of Shadows, or my Twitter feed at Kevin Shipp, that's Shipp, S-H-I-P-P. If you have any questions or comments, just email me at intelligencehour@gmail.com. Do we live under a post-constitutional government? Is there really a shadow government or deep state that controls Washington, D.C. behind the scenes? Why does it seem like congressional hearings on government corruption never go anywhere? Why do government officials and the heads of major Wall Street corporations commit crimes and lie under oath, but they're never charged? These are the issues we deal with on this program every week, head on, with no conservative or liberal bias, no Republican or Democratic influence, and no manipulation by large corporate sponsors. The Intelligence Hour has one goal: to fulfill our constitutional responsibility to inform you, the American people, our audience, about the actions of your government. You are the voice of government by the people. You're the solution to restoring freedom, peace, and justice in this country. Because I believe in your courage and resolve to make a difference, I humbly take the risk every week to expose the actions of government that few others will. Why do I do it? I do it because I adore this country and for the love of freedom. So sit back, relax on this Monday, and join me for a fascinating discussion on the current state of our government, considering the greatest governing document ever written by man, the Constitution of the United States. Tonight, we have as our guest Donald Jeffries, author of 2 books, Hidden History and Survival of the Richest. On the program, we'll be discussing the serious situation that Americans are facing financially in this country. Most just trying to survive from paycheck to paycheck. Some can't even afford to do that. Most Americans are suffering in their finances, their jobs, and their homes, and it seems like no one cares. While congressmen and senators purchased by powerful corporate lobbyists promise their voters at home they'll make their economic situation better, they turn around and vote for billions of dollars in secret budgets, part of what I call the shadow government, for foreign wars and covert dark operations that many times kill tens of thousands of people, including civilians. And they do this without any approval from their voters back home, whose tax dollars they take and send overseas. Wall Street CEOs make millions a year, and the rich and elite effectively run America and its huge central banks, completely detached from the common person and their struggles. During the 2008 financial crisis, Wall Street CEOs who engaged what was essentially fraud drove their massive corporations to the brink of collapse. They were bailed out by the U.S. government using taxpayer dollars. They were never held accountable, and astoundingly, they left their companies and were rewarded with multi-million-dollar severance packages. The CEO of the globalist bank Goldman Sachs alone received a staggering $70 million in compensation. Thousands of Americans, the little guy, lost their houses and were financially devastated. None of the perpetrators went to jail. They just got richer. The government bailed them out, but did nothing to help Americans who lost everything. The U.S. government operates some 250 military bases overseas, with current troop deployments costing $10 billion a year. while over 40% of Americans can barely make it on a paycheck. That's if they have one. The unemployment rate is twice what the government tells us, and millions of Americans cannot find a job due to trade agreements that favor other countries over ours and corporate outsourcing for cheap, sometimes slave labor in foreign countries. More than 45 million Americans live below the poverty line, and they're barely surviving. The average household is in debt over $62,000 and can't pay it off. The middle class is slipping to join the 45 million. Although their budgets are conveniently secret, the NSA spends over $20 billion a year to spy on us and the rest of the world. While the CIA keeps its budget a secret from the American taxpayer, and unchecked government secrecy is never a good thing, we know that the total U.S. government spends on intelligence operations annually is $30 billion a year. That's billion with a B. Right now, millions are being spent in Syria, where over 400,000 people have been killed in a burgeoning war most Americans are against. We've not learned from the trillions lost in Iraq and the tens of thousands who died there in a war created by false intelligence from our secret or shadow government. And the American taxpayer has no say in where this money goes. Most of the time, they're not told where it goes, or they're not even aware of the operations taking place. Corruption runs rampant in Congress, with extortion-like practices designed to pass legislation that favor corporate donors while threatening legislation to those who don't pay up. Huge foreign lobby interests like Saudi Arabia swing Congress's votes in their direction. So much legislation has been passed with wording buried so deep in massive texts that it's been calculated that the average American commits about 3 felonies a day without knowing it. And if the little man or little woman dares to cross the powerful IRS, which is not even a government agency, it means financial destruction. The IRS drains Americans from taxes. Then the government uses those taxes for whatever it wants, including spying on the same taxpayer who funds it. In Hollywood, business and sports, greed and avarice rule the day. The golden rule, do to others what you want them to do to you, no longer applies in America. It's inconvenient, it's outdated, and just an obstacle to fame and wealth. The incoming disparity between the elite and the average American is stunning. Americans have been forced into a kind of modern serfdom, in a condition of servitude, barely surviving financially, unable to confront all of this because they are just trying to survive. Burdened down with taxes, funding government programs, with no voice, and paying millions in salaries to unelected officials. Americans are paid lower and lower salaries by their corporate lords, who are eliminating job security and retirement from everyone except themselves, while big corporations hide their money overseas and pay almost taxes. Enough is enough. Tonight, I have a special guest, Donald Jeffries, author of Hidden History, and his new book, which is soon to be released, Survival of the Richest. You can find both of these books on Amazon.com, and I also highly recommend that you check out his blog, Keeping It Unreal, at donaldjeffries.wordpress.com. In his new book, which is just coming out, Survival of the Richest, which we'll be talking about tonight, he does a superlative job of laying out the solutions to the serious financial condition we're facing in America today and the gross greed and corruption of the corporate, government, and entertainment elite. Donald Jeffries, welcome tonight to the program.
Well, thanks for having me, Kevin.
Hey, it's good to talk to you, Donald. And as we were talking before the show, it seems like you and I go way back.
Yes, we do. Went to elementary school together.
Yeah, I think I was way back in Woodburn Elementary School, I guess it was, wasn't it?
Right. Boy, it must have been something in the air there to produce. Boy, I agree with everything you said. A couple of radical thinkers here, but I think that's what we need. We need some unfortunately, some radical solutions to the problems we have.
I think, Donald, you're absolutely right. And it's ironic that two of us come together after all these years, and I think join a lot of others to what is essentially a patriotic constitutional revolution that I think is beginning in this country. And I think that's clearly what we need. Hey, I've read your book, Hidden History. I wanted to just start out and tell us about your book, Hidden History, and basically what that's all about.
Well, what I did is I started with the JFK assassination, which was the first It's something I'm still obsessed with, but I became obsessed with that as a teenager and just started delving into it. And it kind of led me into all these other areas when I started seeing this was not an isolated event, but business as usual, the way our leaders do business. And that's what I tried to do in Hidden History. I just kind of described basically 50 years from the Kennedy assassination on of just the timeline of uninterrupted corruption. And you can see all the unnatural deaths, all the hidden evidence, and these are patterns in all of these events, whether it's JFK assassination, the 9/11, Waco, the Clinton body count, the Bush body count, anything you look at, it's the same story. And one connection they all have is the fact that the establishment press doesn't do any kind of investigative reporting on any of these issues. So it's left to people like me to publish these things, and readers are always amazed. I didn't know that. Well, you didn't know a lot of it because the Washington Post, the New York Times, none of the television networks, they didn't tell you. They were there. Right. They just chose to just pass on the official talking points. The authorities say this, whatever official government spokesman. It doesn't matter that the facts are, as I show in all these cases, they change constantly, including things like, something like Vince Foster. Where the basic facts about the crime scenes are changed completely, and no one blinks. And there's no investigative reporter out there that says, "Wait a minute, you just said this, and now you're saying that." They just don't do it. They have this incredible ability to swallow these government pronouncements, no matter how much they contradict the previous government pronouncements. So it's.
Yeah, Donald, I couldn't agree with you more. You're so right. And as you and the audience know, I call myself a recovering CIA officer. and we have to go through a 24-step recovery program. The first 12 steps are we have to learn how to tell the truth again. but I can tell you, coming from that perspective as a counterintelligence investigator in kind of an analytical world, and I've been through your book and a lot of what's in there, and I can tell you that analysis is correct, that there are a lot of things, serious things from JFK to 9/11 and on down that our government has not told us about, which is one of the reasons that we started this program. But there are facts out there, fact after fact after fact, that has been withheld from people and has not been reported in the mainstream media. They won't touch it. And that's a whole nother show we'll get into eventually. But with books like yours and things that are coming out, people need to know these things, that there's information out there they're not getting. For example, what people don't remember is with Vince Foster, which you brought up, which is very, very telling. They forget that Bill Clinton fired the FBI director who was trying to look into Foster's death. And of course, everybody's complaining about Comey being fired now, but they forget about that incident, which was just rife with potential very gross felonies. Right. So you're so correct. Down through history, and we did a program a couple weeks ago with Admiral James Lyons about Pearl Harbor and how Pearl Harbor was basically a false flag.
Oh yes, yes.
Covered up in the history books. So this is serious things, and with books like yours and shows like this, the goal is to get people to think for themselves, understand that the mainstream media is not giving people the facts. That's not what they're all about.
Right, and I encourage people. People say they love to smear people like us as conspiracy theorists, and I've told people forever, if you can find a theory in anything I write, let me know what it is, because I'm just laying out what the facts are, and yeah, it's reasonable speculation. Yeah, if for instance, in the JFK assassination, well, if certain people, for instance, McGeorge Bundy, he's my favorite, I believe, actual conspirator. I mean, if someone's sitting in the White House Situation Room that day and telling JFK's cabinet was all in the air over Hawaii at the time in a plane, that there was no conspiracy, like 2 hours after the crime, when not even a cursory investigation had taken place, someone doing that far removed from the situation, actually in the White House Situation Room, coupled with the fact McGeorge Bundy also wrote National Security Action Memorandum 273, which contradicted completely JFK's National Security Action Memorandum 263, which delineated the new policy of a slow withdrawal from Vietnam by 1965. He wrote 273 the day of the assassination, before JFK's assassination. Right. He had to know JFK would have never signed it. So reasonable speculation is there. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck. I mean, I would say he had to have had advanced knowledge of the assassination. That's just one person. So these are just reasonable speculations. In Vince Foster's case, if the Secret Service puts out an official memo that Vince Foster's body was found in his car at Fort Marcy Park, which contradicts every part, we were told he was found on the ground. Reasonable speculation is that no government official could make that kind of incredibly basic mistake. So you have to ask these questions, but no investigative reporter does. And somebody like me asking it from the pages of a book doesn't require the Secret Service or anybody else to provide an explanation. So these are
very good points. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to just to get the point across that this is just analysis of basic factual information. Not reaching any conclusions other than laying out exactly what the evidence is. I taught a class in a couple of universities on criminal justice and criminal investigation. And then for my counterintelligence past, that's how I look at these things. And I think, Donald, you do too as well. I look at these from a pure criminal investigation where you gather the evidence, you line up the facts, pure empirical facts, and then you take a look at it globally and see what this could mean. What you've laid out in your book, I think very, very well, on all these cases are the facts and the evidence about these things that were not reported in the mainstream media. And if you set these facts aside, as if you're doing a criminal investigation, and you look at them, you say, oh, my goodness, there's something going on here that we're not being told about. We have to remember that the term conspiracy theory was invented by the CIA as a diversion in the press from some of the things going all the way back to MK Ultra and Mockingbird and other things that they were doing. And so they'll throw that term out, and it's called a straw man. When someone like you, Donald, starts bringing some of these facts out, they'll throw up the straw man and say, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory, as if that's supposed to shut down all of the criminal investigation. And in the press, that has worked. And that's why we need books and analysis, I think, like yours, that people can read and actually see the facts, because they're not getting them elsewhere.
Right. Well, the 1967, the infamous memo from the CIA countering criticism of the Warren Report, I'm sure you're familiar with that. I mean, if anybody who goes and looks at that now, it's just a blueprint for the way the press has acted, not only about the JFK assassination, but about everything.
Yeah.
And as you said, they instantly, it's the classic attack the messenger case, or, try to come up with, oh, I guess you think Elvis is still alive, or, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Or,
pumping gas.
Pumping gas, or, bringing aliens and things like that. And it's to try to smear you. And it's I think increasingly it doesn't work, but you see people like Stephen Colbert and Bill Maher and people like that in television to their dwindling audiences. If you watch them attack the Alex Joneses and people like that of the world, it's actually sad to watch them, because they may have the greatest case the other day. Colbert was trying to get his ridiculous audience, to respond with the applause signs to Trump firing Comey, and they didn't react the right way. They cheered when he announced that he'd fired, and he looked pathetic. He said, a lot of Trump fans here. So it's actually pathetic, because it just proved again what sheep the audiences are. They're not thinking for themselves, and somehow they just didn't react the right way, in a group way, which unthinking groups will do. And it's actually pathetic to watch these people. But that's what we have for public spokesmen, and that's why in the case of Survival of the Rich, it's a little bit different, because it's ostensibly something that should be attractive to some of the mainstream media, because it seems to be pseudo-liberal, but they don't want. That's why, for instance, I devoted a whole chapter in Survival of the Richest to Huey Long, because Huey Long should be the hero of the left. He did what they proclaimed to do, but they despise him. I have quotes in the book from the Communist Party and the Socialist Party of America. They hate him. The Democratic Party hates him. And, they just smear him as a demagogue, because he actually did something. He didn't go through an LBJ, FDR type of absurd bureaucracy where nothing gets to the people they're supposed to help. He actually said, no, I want to go where the money is, and let's distribute it fairly. And that's what I am. I'm a populist. I'm not a liberal or conservative, and I'm probably far left on most issues, but I'm far right on some too, because I just approach it from the way I think reasonably people ought to approach these issues.
Well, and this left-right conservative liberal paradigm is kind of a way to divide people in two. I'm like you. I'm kind of a conservative libertarian, where
Right.
well, you don't have to be one or the other. You
Right.
can hold some conservative views, some liberal views, quote unquote, but they try to divide everybody into two opposing groups, and I think there's some intentionality behind that. But you're so right. It is some of these things. You use the word cover up loosely, but when you line some of these facts up, that's exactly what some of these things are. And it's programs like this and books like yours. We've got to get into exposing these stuff. And let me ask this, Donald. I know Huey Long did some incredible things for his constituency as governor and senator, and then he reached a tragic death. Do you think that someone had Huey Long taken out?
Oh, I definitely think so. I definitely do not think it was the angry young doctor, son of one of Huey Long's many political opponents, and his family. Dr. Carl Weiss's family doesn't think so either to this day. I have a whole, I delineate a lot of the facts about his assassination in Survival of the Richest. A lot of the typical kind of questions we would see later in JFK and all these other cases are there. The withheld evidence, the questionable, readers can read to see exactly what I'm talking about. But Huey Long himself certainly thought people were trying to kill him. He basically, right. You can go back to the congressional record, and they're still out there where he was accusing, he didn't finger Roosevelt directly, but the inference there was that the Roosevelt administration and the powerful forces were trying to stop him because they knew he was going to run for president in 1936. Right. They knew he already had 10 million supporters in his share of the wealth societies around the country. And he would, at the very least, he probably would have prevented Roosevelt from being reelected. And he could very well have taken the country by storm because he was one of the few political speakers out there who could outdo Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a great speaker. Huey Long was captivating. If you listen to his speeches today, and it's just mind-boggling. It's just, it's such compelling theater to watch him. And one can only imagine a character like him in today's age being able to being able to be on television, to put out YouTube videos. He was absolutely amazing, and he was saying things that everybody understood. You put it in layman terms. There's all this grub on the table, and we got to stop the Rockefellers and the Harrimans and the Vanderbilts from taking everything. Mm-hmm. And it's something that everybody can understand. And that was so much better than the rhetoric about no one should be starving, no one should be poor, and then let's start a new program. And we're still fighting the war on poverty that the LBJ began. Just like the war on drugs. These are failed wars because they're not approached the right way. And I think Huey Long was different, and I think that's why his legacy is what it is. The people like Roosevelt and Truman are thought of and favorably by the court, what I call the court historians, which I think serve the same purpose for history that the mainstream reporters serve for today's current events. They cover things up, and they write these distorted events, and they give reputations to people that don't deserve them. Therefore, the warmongers, the biggest warmongers, the Woodrow Wilsons, the Franklin Roosevelts, Clarence Darrow, people like that, these are considered liberal heroes. Teddy Roosevelt. Right. Whereas the people like Henry Ford was a genuine pacifist, Huey Long, people like that, they are considered either smeared as anti-Semites or somehow they're racist. Mm-hmm. But they were actually against a war, and they were actually in Huey Long's case, he was something which I would consider a pure liberal, in many ways. But again, it's very difficult to get past the court historians and the establishment press, so you have to kind of go directly to the people, and hopefully what few people are, we have a dwindling reading audience for books, but the people that do, I think that's where you can get the genuine alternative views outside of the internet.
I think you're right too, Donald. People, how many people know who Huey Long is? Do you hear anything about Huey Long at all? If you'd ask somebody on the street who he was, they wouldn't even know. And as we proved on the program a couple of weeks ago, FDR, and of course he's painted as a hero in history, FDR had solid intelligence that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor. And he concealed it on purpose so that the attack would happen, and then fingered an admiral and a general as the cause. This is what FDR did. It's proven. We had an admiral, commander of the Pacific Fleet, come on and say it. And yet you hear a giant wind tunnel sucking sound out there when people hear these dramatic facts
Yeah.
And you just hear nothing. And of course, the media, we're going to do a program on the CIA's Operation Mockingbird, where they planted journalists in the media. And allegedly that was done away with in 1976. And what most people don't realize, the paid part was done away with, but it continued to be voluntary. And and you mentioned the Washington Post, which I think seemed to be a big propagator of that. And I can tell you from when I was a former CIA officer that the Post gets fed things from the CIA pretty routinely. So we know that the press, they're bought by their sponsors and their advertisers. They're bought by their corporate board like GE and others that are big federal government contractors. And they're driven by wealth and these things. And so they have absolutely no intention of publishing the truth to people. They're basically bought and paid for. That's why the internet they're terrified of it. They're terrified of the internet. They're terrified of shows like this. They're terrified of books like yours. And they're trying to stamp them out any way that they can. But I think they're getting scared because these things, internet shows, programs like this and others are starting to have an effect.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Operation Mockingbird. You still have people like Anderson Cooper, who son of Gloria Vanderbilt, who again he has the inherited wealth, and he also admits to being recruited by the CIA while he was in college. So these things still exist, but as more and more young people face the reality of the situation out there. You mentioned the unemployment rate. Back in the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, they changed the way these figures are calculated, and they did it to try to make things always appear better than they are. So traditionally before that, they actually reported the unemployment figures in a much more accurate way, where actually people that are unemployed. Now it's just the people that are currently collecting unemployment benefits. Right. So to say it's 4.4% is absolutely absurd, especially when you, in the same breath, you say 94 to 100 million adult Americans of working age are out of work. I mean, that kind of Common Core math doesn't add up, and people understand that. I mean, they acknowledge that I think there are 3 times as many job seekers as there are jobs. And that's why I thought it was so distressing and on so many levels what Trump has actually done since he's been in office. But one of the most promising things was it looked like he was finally going to end this deadly H-1B visa guest worker program and the other guest worker programs. He didn't. He had some rhetoric about it. He allowed the program to continue. This is absurd to be having people bringing in workers from other countries to do jobs. And I see it in my industry, the IT industry, where they are really, really have had a dramatic impact on wages, because you have a computer program that might be making $80,000 a year. You lay them off and you bring in an H-1B visa worker, usually from India, and pay him $40,000 a year. It's very easy to see the impact that has on that industry and other industries. It's the same kind of impact illegal immigrants have had on the lower sections, where they smear Americans and say they're doing the jobs Americans won't do. Well, Americans won't do it for slave labor. And I try to tell people all the time, especially younger people, I said, who do you think used to mow the lawns? Who do you think used to paint the houses and do landscaping and do deck work? So, it got done.
Yeah. Well, that's what I did when I was putting myself through college. That's exactly what that's absolutely true. And those figures, especially unemployment, are being completely misrepresented in this the HB1 visa program. You're probably aware of this. Congress just tried to double that program secretly and slip that in the budget. And I think so far it looks like they're successful. People don't know about that. They're trying to bring tech jobs from overseas into this country and fire the Americans that are doing them.
Yeah, and if anything's treasonous, I mean, that is treasonous. But again, we have no one. And that's why I'm more and more. I'm a huge fan of Gerald Celente. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He's far left, and I agree with him. So I can't get a hold of him ever. I think he would love my book, especially the new one. But for whatever reason, he's difficult to get a hold of. But we're on the same wavelength on almost everything. And Celente is fond of talking about how we need an injection of direct democracy. And you mentioned the Constitution. I think our system of government is practically perfect. But the problem is with the people running it, we just can't get them out. So it doesn't matter how good the system is if you have evil people running, evil, corrupt people. So I think we need an injection of direct democracy. And just imagine if you put something like, let's put this out as a national referendum. Should America be bringing in any guest workers from other countries for jobs? That would be a no vote, 99% probably, if you had that. If it was collected, and we saw the same thing in the banker bailout. Every poll at the time said 90+% of the people said no, absolutely not. I'm sure you would have had it with GM as well. But there's such a disconnect between what the people want, and you mentioned it earlier, and what the representatives actually do. That's why I think you need, the constitutional republic is a great idea in that respect. But when the people representing us aren't representing us, talk about taxation without representation, then I think you have to do something like have some referendums, and you would have to make it so that there would be a constitutional provision that says no federal judge, because that's what they would do. They did it with some of Trump's early orders, and they would just, send it to some typical lackey judge, and he would say, no, this is unkind. And they did it with some of the propositions that were passed in the states in the past. But we can't have that. You say, whatever the people, this is a referendum, the people rule here. And you have to have something like that, or nothing's ever going to change, because our representatives are hopelessly, disconnected from the will of the people. And we see this over and over again, where if they're even counting the votes, which I think it's highly unlikely they aren't, but however you look at it, every poll shows that Congress has a less than 10% approval rating. Yet every election we vote 96% of the incumbents back in. Now, either the voting public is that stupid, or it's all rigged, as our friend Trump was fond of saying, and to our delight during his campaign. But the system is rigged, and I in hidden history I have a whole section on vote scam, and voter fraud goes way back, and it's not it's not the Russians doing it, folks. I guarantee you that. It's our own people, our own system. And the system is rigged, and we need to do something to try to get the power. And that's what populism is, and what I am as a populist: power to the people. Let the people rule. Let's have the will of the majority. You don't want to neglect the minority, but let's have the will of the majority. Let's do what's best for the vast majority of the people. It's just common sense. You build roads and bridges, as Trump talked about. You do things. You send the resources. You talked about the blackout budgets and the secret budgets of the intelligence agencies we know nothing about. All this money is going into black holes. We don't know where they're spent or how much is being spent. At the same time, our country is literally crumbling, and that was one of the most exciting things about Trump's campaign. He was saying things I've been saying for decades. America's roads, bridges. He didn't talk about the power grids. Our power grids, they're woefully outdated. They're pathetic for the richest country in the world. They need to be rebuilt. So those resources that are going in all these other directions, keeping military bases open from World War II overseas, senseless stuff like that, foreign aid to countries and rebuilding their infrastructure after we bomb them, usually, before we rebuild our own.
We destroy it, and then we pay millions to try to rebuild it back again.
It's crazy. I mean, no rational, if you actually look at it. But the problem is, I think, Kevin, is that you find with all these subjects, I think survival of the richest, I will find more receptive people, because that's something that hits people in their pocketbooks. But as far as politics goes and history, most Americans are historically illiterate. They just don't even, they don't even know much about the fake cover stories, let alone.
I mean, they sit, sadly, people sit on their couch and they watch the news thinking that they're getting the real news and the truth. And I think a lot of people out there don't realize that they need to question everything the mainstream media does and check it out for themselves. Your average man, lady comes home from work and they're tired and exhausted, and they plop down on the couch and they turn the TV on, and they're fed what these sectors want them to hear. And right now, in a constitutional government, Congress is gone. It's bought. It's paid for. The extortion on Capitol Hill is mind-boggling, so much so that when you research it and check it out, you feel like you got to take a shower afterwards. And Congress is the representative of the people. And what we prove in some of our writings and speeches, Congress has no clue what the secret intelligence agencies are doing. They're not given the clearance. When they do ask for something, it's all blacked out, like one section in my book. And so this is a constitutional crisis. When Congress is corrupt and then accepted out of what some of these secret programs are doing and the billions of tax dollars they're using, when Congress goes, so goes the constitutional government. We're in a post-constitutional government right now. People need to understand that we need to take that back. And one of the reasons I chose the theme song for this show is I believe we need a civil revolution of the people out there, voting, speaking, doing these referendums that you're talking about, and primarily exposing the system of corruption that operates or is operating our government right now, because the people are the only solution, as has been the case down through history. Every movement, including the fall of the Soviet Union, starts with a movement among the people. And in terms of restoring the constitutional government to the United States, it's people. We got to get off our couches. We got to turn off the TV. We got to start studying things ourselves. And then people got to get active. Trump appealed to a lot of people who know all these things. They're tired of this system that has been going on outside the Constitution. And that's how Trump got in. Now, we're all kind of watching him and somewhat disappointed in the things he said and the things he's not doing. And then you've got other sectors out there that think he's just a total fascist. And I mean, the guy certainly has a unique personality style. But the point is despite Trump's really out-of-the-box personality, what he proposed was a return back to the people. Now, whether he's going to do that or is doing that or not, or whether he's been purchased by the shadow government, I think some of us are concerned about that. But people are getting active, and Trump got in not because of conservative or liberal things. It's a movement in the United States. We want our government back. We want the Constitution back. But to do that, people need to be informed, and really the internet media and things like that are the only way, because as we've talked about several times, the mainstream media essentially, sadly, is gone.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And as you mentioned, Trump's appeal is, for somebody like me, I've never voted for a Republican before. I voted for Ron Paul in the primary, but again, I don't think of Ron Paul as a Republican either. Really, he ran as a Libertarian presidential candidate once. Yeah. I look at these guys. I mean, I love Dennis Kucinich on the left. I love Cynthia McKinney on the left. I love Ron Paul on the right. I love Pat Buchanan on the right. And Trump, resonated with some of his stuff was horrible. I mean, his police state, supporting the cops, give them more power, and he loves private prisons. All these really anti-libertarian. You can see Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. I mean, his main concern seems to be to bring back harsh penalties for small amounts of marijuana. I mean, just crazy stuff. That's
shocking. Yeah, I was shocked to hear that. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. But when Trump said things like, that his most brilliant statement was he essentially got it in a nutshell, was when the system is rigged and you can't fix it by trusting those who rigged it. And that's exactly the truth. And he said so many other things. He talked about auditing the Federal Reserve. I think he mentioned Building 7 once in 9/11. He said some a lot of his speeches, I could have written them. And I mean, were that radical. So I couldn't believe it. But so far, he's been disappointed. Certainly from the standpoint of myself as a Huey Long fan, he never had that much appeal. But I just think some of his populist proposals, I mean, certainly just bringing industry back to the country, ending these deadly trade deals. If we actually had something like that where we brought back the factories where people used to work, I tell people all the time, everybody, they talk about edge. I mean, our politicians do these self-serving, the Barack Obama type things, every child, no child left behind. You need an education for let's care for the children, as if anybody doesn't care for the children. I mean, who's against the children? Who's against education? But the problem is, with every new college degree, it dilutes the value of every college degree. And what is happening is that and I put in one of the saddest statistics, you want to say there's no upward mobility. Not only does from the top income quartile, the richest quarter of Americans, 77% of people from that quarter graduate from college. Only 9% of those in the bottom quarter graduate from college. That's a huge dichotomy there. But see, even more telling is the fact that most people, the most successful people in this country, you find go to the same colleges, Ivy League, the top colleges. Of the top 146 colleges around the country, only 3% of the students come from that bottom quarter. And probably a large degree, a number of those are athletes who don't remotely belong there, but get there because of their athletic ability. Only 10% come from the bottom half of America. So you see that there's no upward mobility there. And what's happening is that, the people, if you're going to your local community college or something like that, there's a big video I call The College Conspiracy. The average student is left with $32,000 of student loan debt.
Yeah, that's right.
They're getting jobs now that used to only require high school degrees, and they're paying less than they used to pay high school. So that's what they're doing. You're not getting your money's worth. No one talks about this, and still they just say, oh, there's value of a college education. They don't talk about the single important issue in my estimation. If I was running for Congress, the issue I'd be focusing on constantly is the undisputed fact that the vast majority of workers, those that have jobs, are simply not being paid enough to meet the ever increasing cost of living. And that's what you have, the income level versus what you need just for the necessities of life.
Well,
And
that's
that's
right,
why,
and you're so right, and they're just barely surviving. And what's happening is they can't meet their expenses on their paycheck. They're all going deep into debt. I mentioned earlier, the average American now is $62,000 in debt. So when they have an emergency, whether it's medical or car repair or something, they don't have the funds to pay for it, so they go deeper into debt. And
right.
we're becoming basically a new neo serfdom in that most Americans are in debt and so swamped with debt they can barely survive. And when a civilization gets in that condition, they're in kind of a serfdom kind of bondage.
Yeah, 62% of the people have less than $1,000 in savings, so they have nothing to fall back on. And I have all the statistics in my book. I mean, it's amazing. 20% of the households in America have no one working in them. Huge numbers of children living in poverty, and we just kind of we gloss over these things, and there's empty rhetoric, especially on the part of the Democrats for it, but nothing ever gets done. I mean, you can go back to old campaign speeches from the 60s, LBJ, and he was talking about this stuff, and the problem is he had the guns and butter philosophy. Well, not maybe a little butter got through down, but now we've gone, into the new millennium here, and it's a lot of guns. And I don't know where the butter is. I mean, the butter, you hear, I hear conservatives all the time talking about the welfare and so forth. Since the 90s, when Bill Clinton reformed welfare, again, just as he reformed the drug laws, where the 3 strikes you're out, the mandatory, prison sentences, it resulted in huge increases of people being incarcerated.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And it's it's the same thing with. We see that now, where the left doesn't seem to understand that what they're doing isn't working, and just to continue proposing, let's have an increase in that, or even raising the minimum wage, which I certainly support, but it needs to be, especially in large corporations, it needs to be tied, because apparently there's just such unbridled greed out there. I mean, whether it's 350 times the average worker pay to CEO pay or more, the statistics vary, but whatever it is, it's way out of whack with the rest of the world. And I don't believe in government intervention. I mean, at heart, I used to be a libertarian philosophically, but the problem is, left to their own devices, this is what happens. I mean, left to their own devices, that they're bringing back debtors' prisons.
Yeah, they want
to bring child labor back. I mean, we saw recently, Congress 2 weeks ago, they opened the door to eliminate overtime. And one of the most important legislation acts in the history, and it was largely due to the pressure from Huey Long and people on the left who wanted far more powerful legislation. But we still got the best thing to come out of Roosevelt's administration was the National Labor Relations Act in 1938, which established a 40-hour working week. Huey Long wanted a 30, maybe 20-hour work week. It established vacation and sick leave. It established pensions. It established overtime, things like that we take for granted now. Before that time, most working class people never went on vacation, or because they couldn't afford to. They didn't get paid.
Right. Yeah.
And we just took that for granted. Baby boomers like us we grew up under this system, and we took these benefits now they're being for granted, and they're being chipped away gradually. And this terrible idea, pushed largely by the Republican conservatives that Trump is listening to way too much, it opens the door to what they call flexibility, the Paul Ryan type of thing, where they basically want to stop working class people from making more money. I mean, even overtime, you got to work more to do it, but at least it gives you a chance with the time and a half pay to make more money. Well, this opens the door to eliminate that, and we already see with the return to child labor and the debtors' prisons all over the place. They may not be calling them that, but that's what they are.
Oh, that's right.
That we're returning to an early era that people like Charles Dickens wrote about in the mid 1800s. So it's. Well,
you're right.
Yeah,
you're right. And people are feeling this. You can talk to just about anybody, and they all feel that exactly what you're talking about is going on. And I was shocked at what Sessions said recently about the prosecutions of drug-related offenses. And, I'll give you an example of that. We know that prisons are privately run now. So ching, ching, every time they get another inmate, they get another influx of cash. I taught criminology in a university, and the prison system is a mess. Matter of fact, let's see, on the 29th of this month, I'm going to have former CIA officer John Carricow on here, who was arrested and put in prison for 30 months for a slip of the tongue. He exposed the torture program. What we're going to be talking about is his experience in prison, and he's working for prison reform now, and it is insane. I'll give you a really quick example here. My son-in-law went to visit a friend at his here down in Jacksonville, Florida. Went to visit a friend. They were sitting on the couch. His friend, apparently, an informant had said he had an ounce of marijuana or something in there. The door was kicked down. In came a bunch of SWAT team armored police officers, arrested them all, took them to jail. He now has a criminal record, even though he was just sitting there, and can't get certain jobs because of that. And this is kind of one of my passions, being formerly in criminal justice. There's a lot of kids sitting in jail that are not criminals, and they want to increase that. I think that's an outrage. But people understand that something is wrong. Very wrong here with our economy and the state that people are in financially. And as I mentioned at the opening of the program, we have these serious financial problems in the lives and employment and unemployment of Americans. And yet, right now in Syria, we're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars in Syria with a lot of things that we're doing over there operationally in secret. And the congressmen and senators that keep promising us that they're going to do something about it don't, and then they vote for these billions of programs in a foreign country that most Americans don't support. That's the constitutional situation we're in, and this trickles down from there. Most of this, which I think you're so right in pointing out, trickles down from Congress. Congress is not supporting the people. They, in their town halls, they smile and they say the right things, but when they go to Capitol Hill, they're bought by these lobbyists, and they do exactly the opposite. And we're in a serious situation. Americans are in a serious financial situation. Everybody knows it. Everybody feels it. And yet most people feel, I think, that they're powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier the way the resources are directed, and a lot of, especially the liberal Democrats, will talk about domestic issues and issues that need to be, obviously problems need to be addressed, but we're always distracted by what H.L. Mencken long ago called an endless series of hobgoblins. Mm-hmm. And these are the monsters that John Quincy Adams said, America doesn't go abroad with in search of monsters to destroy. The early founders and early American leaders understood that this was ridiculous to be doing these but starting with the Spanish-American War in 1898, and certainly with World War I, America started going into this globalist mindset, and we developed what this deadly bipartisan foreign policy. And I wrote an article about it on my blog a while back, which says, American all bipartisan foreign policy is all war, no peace.
Yeah,
and
right.
That's what it is.
That's true.
And what happens is they get distracted. Yeah, true, we need to build our roads and bridges, but look at this new boogeyman over there that we invented, whoever it is, Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, pick your boogeyman of the moment. It doesn't matter if the CIA or government supported them for years before that, put them in power. And it was Al-Qaeda. Now it's ISIS or ISIL or whatever you want to call them. But it's always something. There's always some reason why we can't repair our own roof. No, we have to go do this. I mean, this is a bigger problem. Do you want him to be raping? And it's always they use babies. They use raping. But it's if you go back to the 1898 to begin with. You see, not only do we have these, just an endless series of false flag events that are proven from there to Pearl Harbor, whatever, but you see the same kind of rhetoric to get the country upset, whether it's the dreaded Hun, the dirty, sneaky, rotten Japs, now the terrorists, whoever it is, whoever the boogeyman of the moment is, and it's to incite the people against them, and they always have a figurehead leader that they can really hate. The guy in North Korea now, these kind of people where people, and I'll tell them, I said, what do you know about that? You don't even know anything about these. What I do know is our leaders. I know what they're doing. I know, I know I can prove how corrupt they are, and I know they're not representing the will of the people. So I don't know how, bad things are in North Korea or Syria or anywhere else, but I do know that my own country is falling apart, and that we need to address that. I mean, if your own house is crumbling, if your own kids are starving, what are you doing going around the neighborhood, feeding the other kids and burning half the houses down in the process instead of fixing your own? That's what we've been doing in America for a long time.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I want to have you back to talk about the shadow government and its state of perpetual war, and especially the boogeyman's creating the boogeyman. That's what and I call it the shadow government. That's the secret government outside the Constitution that we're seeing. And what people don't understand, or some do, but most don't, is what these shadow programs have done is sometimes gross humanitarian violations. We raised the secret government did, formerly we raised the specter of all the horrible things down in South America, and we supported Pinochet and his death squads, where they killed 500,000 people, many of which were women and children, supported by our intelligence agencies using our tax dollars. This sort of thing has been going on down through history. That's what the shadow government does, and they use our tax dollars to do it. And so they're taking these billions and billions, and of course we all now see that the NSA is spying on everybody. And they're getting some blowback now with some of this hacking things. But this $30 billion that goes to these secret intelligence agencies comes out of our tax dollars with absolutely no vote by the American people whatsoever. I'd like to have you come back on and talk about that, because we can spend a whole hour on that one. Sure. Let me, as we're running out of time here, but let me let you have the last word on this in terms of survival of the richest and what's going on in our economy, especially with the situation Americans are in. Let me give you the last word. What do you think is there any solution to this for people, or what do you think that where we should go from here, and what people can do about this?
Well, I think survival of the richest looks at first of all, it talks about money. Most people don't want to talk about money. They don't want to talk about income. I think we need to do that. I don't think it should be secret that a Carly Fiorina and people like that get $40 million golden parachutes when they fail miserably at their jobs.
That's right. Yeah.
While somebody else hasn't, is working for $9 an hour, working much harder than any CEO ever worked, and is not getting a raise for 5-10 years, has no path at all. Even we used to complain about the cost of living raises, which were never really enough to meet the cost of living. At least there was something, but I think we need to talk about money. It needs to not be a forbidden subject anymore, because money there's just a finite amount of it, and that's why people like Huey Long and populists recognize, we don't want to confiscate money, but the problem is behind every great fortune lies a great crime. Victor Hugo said that a long time ago. I don't think it's possible to accumulate $1 billion, honestly. I just don't think it is. And when you have that much money, and that's why most people don't realize about Huey Long, his tax proposal back in the 1930s exempted the first $1 million from taxation. That would be what, $50, $100 million today. So who he was going after. He was going after the absolute 1% of the 1%. That's where we need to target. That people cannot imagine how much wealth is at the top, and the way these people, it's unbelievable, and it's unconscionable that they have this kind of wealth.
You're so right. We've entered into such a place of obscene greed in this country. It's just, it's nothing like this has ever been seen in history, and it's just shocking and mind-boggling. And I hope Donald, we can have you on again and talk about more of this. And I want to get into some of the shadow government stuff perhaps in the future. But this has been a great conversation. I thank you so much for coming on. If you'd like to come back, I'd love to have you. We'll do another program on this.
Oh, anytime, Kevin. I'd love to talk to you.
Outstanding. Well, Donald, thanks for coming on the program, giving people this information. I would encourage everybody strongly, ladies and gentlemen, go out and get Donald's book, Hidden History, and read it. Read it for yourself. I've read it. I've read it twice. And he goes through fact by fact by fact and lays out things I think everybody needs to read and see. You can find Hidden History on Amazon.com. Prepare yourself for Survival of the Richest. It's coming out. Get your hands on that. And go to Donald's blog, Keeping It Unreal, at DonaldJeffries.com at WordPress, and check that out. And thank you so much for coming on, Donald.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
All right. We'll see you back again soon.
Okay.
Remember, you can contact me at intelligencehour@gmail.com. That's intelligencehour@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook from the Company of Shadows, Twitter at Kevin Shipp. And as we close out this edition of the Intelligence Hour, I always like to leave my audience with a famous quote attributed to Thomas Jefferson. Every time I do a speech or a lecture, I like to put this at the end because it is so important for us always to remember. It goes like this: When people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. I want us all to remember that. And next week, our guest is going to be Martin Kaiser, former government spy and bugging expert. He was the technical advisor to the movie Enemy of the State. He's the author of 2 books, Odyssey of an Eavesdropper, His Life as an Espionage Bugging Detector, and Help Yourself, a story of FBI corruption. So I don't want you to miss that program. And as we wrap up this edition of the Intelligence Hour, I want you all to remember, it's the Constitution that keeps us free, and it's faith, family, and friends that make life fulfilling, and that is real wealth. This is your host for the Intelligence Hour, Kevin Shipp. I'll see you next week.